Yes, of course. Um, Everything depends on what you mean by currency. Let's look at that word for a minute. In a certain literal sense, currency is that which is current. And in that sense, money is certainly currency because it's the most current thing. It's the god of the world, or so it would seem, as it is running today. Uh, Money, as it's taught to young, vulnerable, tenderfoot undergraduate students, is simply a medium of exchange, they're told. Or it's a unit of account, or it's a store of value. Those are the three basic meanings associated with the notion of money for an undergraduate textbook. It's not wrong, but it's simply inadequate and deeply misleading when it comes to the historical origins of money. All the recent research, all the good recent research on the historical origins of money is showing us something else. Money is actually a form of debt, that four-letter word debt. And it used to be created in order to fund wars. That is the most common historical origin of money, if you will. So, not coincidentally, money is still being created as debt in order to finance wars, for which who is paying? The future is paying. Those, unarmed, innocent citizens who don't understand all this, they are paying. Even if you understand all this, you have to pay the taxes and so on. And so on. So, and this is a global phenomena. So, money is actually a ruse. It is not as innocent as economists would like to believe and teach. Money is a trick. Money is a ruse which allows you to imagine the abstract as the most concrete thing and reckon everything in terms of the abstract. If you look at your world around you today, money has become the universal measure. How much does a society gain from policy X? Measure it in money. How much does it lose? Measure it in Y. If X is greater than Y, let's go ahead with the policy, etc. For everything, from choices in medical and public health, choices in energy, in education, everything has been turned into a business model reckoned in terms of money. So, could there be another way to reckon things? Of course. There are many other ways to reckon things. And what I would say is that when it comes to the economy and extraction and use of resources, energy is indeed the right unit of account. Energy is not something you can create through debt, the way you create money. It's not fiction. It's not abstract. It's a very real, tangible thing which has very real, tangible results. Money is an illusion which has real results. Energy is not an illusion. It's a reality which generates other realities. Now, the two basic laws of thermodynamics, which every school kid knows, the first one is that matter and energy cannot be created or destroyed. Energy has the distinct advantage of measuring real things against real things. Unlike money, which can be created at will ad infinitum, energy is not like that. Energy is limited. The laws of thermodynamics tell us that the amount of energy in the universe is always constant. It just changes form. So the question is, when does it exist in a useful form and when does it exist in an entropic form? And that's what basically is relevant for human beings as far as the use of energy is concerned. So yes, we do need energy accounting, and virtually no one does that. Or even if they do it, they hardly ever take decisions on the basis of their energy accounting. If they did that, they might find that a lot of oil drilling or a lot of coal searching or so many other sources of energy which are quite commonly used would actually not be used because they would simply not be viable if you do the EROEI, the energy return on energy investment calculation. So there is no getting away from that. and there are constants of the energy universe which retain their constancy in all contexts across space and time. With money, it's not the same. Money is not a stable measure of value. Money changes value itself. Money is created by human beings. It doesn't exist in nature. So there is great danger in having a unit of account or a store of value, which actually is a completely man-made device. In terms of environmental challenges, indeed the answer lies in doing better energy accounting. Corporations and governments, they all do their business now in terms of money. They all measure things in terms of money. Even things like health and medicine, which ought not to be measured in terms of money through their kinds of business models, are actually reckoned in terms of money. That's a big problem. It's a big problem. It ought not to be on the menu. Any other kind of accounting actually ought not to be on the menu. The whole problem is that for so long has humanity lived in the industrial age that it has got used to this false system of accounting. So if you look at nature, and all the laws, like I said, all the laws of thermodynamics point in the direction of the quantum of energy remaining constant. The second law says that the quantum of entropy keeps rising through time. So there is always that default setting, as it were, in the economics of energy in the real sense of the word. Energy accounting is something which is built into any living organism. Every living organism, I'm not a scientist, but this much I do understand, that every living organism is actually a complex way to metabolize energy, to convert it from one form to another form through things like the soil cycle, the water cycle, and so on. And we are part of those processes. Where humanity has gone wrong epistemologically and practically is that we've forgotten that humanity is a part of the ecology of the earth. It's not separate from it. That situation is not tenable according to any self-respecting science. So as long as we're a part of ecosystems, we are a part of the soil and water cycles and so on, we are a part of the energy budget of the planet. So then what kind of an economy is it that can be sustained on a false energy accounting based just on money? The reason why we are having to ask questions about sustainability today is because we have violated. We've gone on a tangent from the cyclical and circular and spiral-like patterns of energy in which we actually live our biological lives. Now, if you break that, how do you break that? That's the first question. You break that by doing something artificial, such as mining non-renewable fuels, which, like we said earlier, have been built over millions of years, and you just mine them away in a few years or a few months sometimes. So that kind of an imbalance, where it takes so much time for the earth to reproduce that kind of energy, and it takes no time to consume it. That is what has led us to this impasse. It's the wrong technique. It's the wrong way to think about the natural world and humanity's place in the natural world. And so you get into any number of imbalances as a consequence of that fundamental misunderstanding, or the application of that fundamental misunderstanding. See, first of all, let's distinguish between doomsaying and doomsdaying. And one reason one doomsays is in order to prevent doomsday. Don't shoot the messenger. That's the message. Face the facts. What I'm telling you are not things which are outside the realm of facts. I'm not sharing some ideology or some inherent bias with you. I'm just telling you what the facts are like. The fact is that nature likes growth up to a point. and then it likes a leveling out, at least along physical dimensions. If there is to be growth after that, then that had better take place in the metaphysical or the psychological dimension of humanity, by which I mean the maturing of humanity into a species with a heart, into a species with a soul, and so on. All the intangibles which can't be measured and which can't be reckoned in terms of mathematical numbers, the infinite, the quest for the infinite. All the religions have engaged with it, so many philosophies have engaged with it, but ordinary humanity does not engage with it. Why? Because power structures of society, whether it's priesthoods or politicians, do not allow that. Okay, one way or another they inhibit that. So that's the direction in which growth has to happen. It has to be towards the intangible and the infinite. To project the human longing and the need for the infinite to the material plane is exactly what industrial civilization has got wrong. Infinity does not lie out there, infinity lies in here. Okay? But humanity is constantly being taught to look for it over there. Buy this product, sell this thing, and you will get closer and closer and closer. And true to the image of the mirage, it never arrives. So the only way for humanity in the future is to actually reckon that the search for the infinite can happen only within and not without, and can only happen through living human communities where you're able to explore relationships along those lines. So the idea of green growth or sustainable growth, I'm not sure what people mean by these things except as transition ideas sometimes. You've got this behemoth of a fossil fuel dependent industrial edifice. And that behemoth rests on a technological foundation which does not change so easily because it has its own inertia. You've trained a whole generation or several generations of people to run those machines. It can't be changed overnight. So the overhang or the legacy of what is already in place will continue, which is why the shadow lengthens into the future. And which is why if you want to slow down this vehicle 20 years from now, you have to act now. I mean, as is known to some people, the emissions which took place in the 1980s and the 1990s are having their impact on humanity and organic life now. So likewise, the decisions taken with respect to industrial civilization at a large scale will have impact over the next 30 years, you know. So if people talk of green growth and sustainable growth in those terms, then purely in that limited context and purely as media hype, if you will, it might be acceptable to listen to those terms used that way. But beyond that, one has to know that nature doesn't like growth beyond a certain limit. And it'll impose its own limits. If we do not respect it, then you will have the runaway, changes which have been predicted from climate change effects and so on. And once runaway effects happen, there is no telling how nature will reach a new homeostasis and a new ecological equilibrium for the planet. See, the way I understand it is that sustainability is a technocratic term. Sustainability, for instance, tells us nothing about our ruptured relationship to the natural world. How does humanity relate to the rest of nature, to animals, to plants, to birds, to insects, to fish, to mountains, to rivers? Throughout history, time and place, and culture, humanity has had a relationship to all these things. For that matter, it has not even seen many of these things as things. They became resources only after the Industrial Revolution. Only in the last 150, 200 years has a mountain or an ocean or parts of space become a resource. So the whole utilitarian worldview is what is so corrupt, because it tends to make people think in terms of what use can I or we make of that thing over there, or for that matter, what use can I make of you and what use will you make of me. So this utilitarian cognition is at the root of the trouble, you know. Whereas to my eyes, it seems that it's our relationship to the natural world which has been interrupted by industrial society. And it's that relationship which has to be resumed, which is why when I speak of a return to nature, I don't mean a literal return in the way that people might imagine it. Because nowadays you have people constantly saying rubbish like, oh, so you're a Luddite. Oh, so you want us to go back to the caves. Now that shows how little imagination people actually have, how that their imagination has been stunted by television and consumer society. Because had their imaginations not been so stunted, then they would have thought more creatively about how we can actually move together in a common direction while respecting ecological cycles, while evolving technologies which are respectful of nature, while remaining within the limits and creating infinitely within that, innovating infinitely within that. If you want to call that sustainability, that's a very different matter. But I don't think that's their meaning of sustainability. Okay. So I would like us to get away from the technocratic notion of sustainability and move towards a creative understanding whereby we can resume our relationship to animals, plants, mountains and rivers, and we can actually live in some degree of harmony with a planet whose organic life is so severely threatened by industrial excess. That's I think what I want to say about it. That's right. I mean, imagine murdering your pet. Would you do that? Would you murder your own dog or your own cat or your own pig or your own cow? You won't do that because you love them, right? Now, we draw our boundaries very cleverly so that we don't allow ourselves to love beyond a certain point. Once we don't allow ourselves to love beyond a certain point, it becomes easy and facile to kill off whatever else exists outside the boundary. And which is what I mean by saying think parochially, consume globally. So only my immediate kith and kin are of any value or significance to me, and the rest of humanity and creation doesn't matter. And every man is being taught to think like that by the advertising. So every man has been made into an ecological solipsist. Okay, every person is made to think I'm the most important person in the universe and I'm separate from it. Okay, these are all falsehoods. These are all mythologies. These are all illusions, and yet people act on them, which is to say, they make their dreams come true, right? And then the dream turns into a nightmare because everybody, guess what, wants an SUV, gets one, puts it on the road, jams the traffic, brings about congestion and pollution, and raises hell for everybody else. So hell becomes other people when you don't notice them in the first place, you know, and you yourself become their hell, you know. And this is the kind of solipsistic stupidity that the West has taught the whole world now, you know. So everybody is supposed to, you know, get hold of the most consumer goodies that they can and clutter their lives with it, and then imagine and pretend that this is heaven and that this is bringing them enormous happiness, and it's not, and it's obvious, you know. Well, because we think of it as boredom, we think of it as stagnation. The idea of steady state growth, or rather steady state economy, a stable steady state economy which takes care of all human needs and perhaps a bit more, does not appeal to us because we've been too filled with rubbish from the advertising. You know, when you spend billions of dollars every day on advertising, you have to ask yourself, why are these corporations doing it? Are they stupid? I mean, because if human beings are intrinsically inborn greedy consumers, they don't need to be flooded with any commercial propaganda in order to make them buy anything. They will go and their greed will do the rest. But you ask yourself the question, why does food have to be advertised? Anyone with a stomach will look for food, find it. That's how it has been happening for thousands of years. Advertising is 100 years old, you know. So why does food have to be advertised? Why does anything have to be advertised? Because people will not buy them otherwise. That's the blunt fact, okay. Now, once you've got people conditioned into becoming consumers, then there is a herd syndrome at work, which is to say that if you have a car and I don't have a car, then my wife is going to say, hey, you know, look at them, they have such a beautiful car and we don't, and you know, this is terrible, and so on. If your wife is wearing a certain lipstick, my wife wants the same lipstick, and so on. That's how advertising works. It basically works through the demonstration effect, and they catch you young from the cradle. Okay, they say every moment a sucker is born in America, and that's what they mean by that. So once you've created this epidemic by actually contaminating human consciousness with unnecessary desires, those desires will mask your own needs. You won't even know what your own needs are after a while, whether it's good health or good friends or happiness or whatever it is. But those are masked now. Those are camouflaged. Those are behind the curtain. And instead, your desires are on overdrive. And desires are what are driving the world. And after a while, you get insecure. You feel a sense of loss. You feel a sense of failure. You keep comparing yourself with others till you somehow feel better, more successful, dominant, and for a while that illusion lasts, and then again you're dethroned, and so on it goes. And a huge amount of misery goes by the name of happiness for this world. And this is the most pathetic world ever invented, in my opinion. So, the whole problem is that our leadership is bought out. Okay? Now, if the leadership is bought out, they have to do the bidding of corporations. If corporations are financing their electoral campaigns in what is called democracy, it's a demockery, it's a mockery of democracy. If they are doing the bidding of corporations, then they want you to buy stuff which corporations produce. Okay? If you don't buy the stuff which corporations produce, the corporate bottom lines don't rise. If the corporate bottom lines don't rise, then government gets less tax revenue, government has smaller budgets, and to put the matter bluntly, in countries like ours, government officers and politicians have a smaller pool of bribes to accumulate from. Okay? There can't be as much corruption as they would ideally like. And so, business as usual can't go on unless you become a loyal nationalist consumer who will keep buying all the cars that Tata wants to produce, or that all the Jeeps that Mahindra wants to sell, and so on. And the same thing drives the arms industry. And so you have warring nationalisms competing for resources, competing for markets, and it's basically overgrown children. That's what our species has become. It's an infantilization and ecological idiotization of a whole species, and it's been going on for so long that we are totally blind to it. But like I said, none of us asked to be here, none of us asked to be born, none of us usually asked to be taken away from here. Those are forces beyond our control. We are puppets in a much larger game which creation plays with us. If we do not respect creation, it knows how to handle us. It knows what to do with us. Okay? So the elements will keep us, cornered, and will ultimately account for us if we do not know how to listen. We don't have as much intelligence as to be able to beat them. Nobody should have that illusion. Well, it comes from the 1970s. The rise of finance comes from the breakdown of a fairly complex set of international monetary arrangements that went by the name of Bretton Woods system. I'm not going to go into the details of that, but basically, once currencies were allowed to fluctuate against each other, once you moved away from fixed exchange rates, then there was money to be made by playing currency markets. Then by stocking up certain currencies at the right time and discharging them in the market at the right time, you could make an arbitrage killing. You could make a big cut. Once financial players, companies, banks, institutions, individuals, they smelled that blood, then there was no going back. That's the power of greed. And after that, one financial regulation after another, which had been set up since the 1930s to control the excesses of speculative finance, that was unraveled, that was undone. Over a period of about 30 years, a whole sequence of laws that had been created since the 1930s to keep financial speculation in check, that was undone. And the net result of it was the 2008 crash. Now, why did this happen can also be understood from another perspective, which is that if you do not pay your workers enough, in other words, if most of the income and wealth is concentrated at the top, there isn't enough demand in the economy for real things. whether it's houses or cars or something else. If there isn't enough demand in the economy, then you have to make up for that demand somehow. You have to create fictitious demand. So what did they do? They lowered workers' wages and they gave them credit cards. So gave them the artificial illusion of prosperity, gave them the idea that, look, you don't have to lose on your standard of living just because your wages are not rising high enough. Here's a credit card, and with that you can buy as much as you like and pay 20% interest or whatever, you know. So the whole credit card boom began in the early 1980s and has gone on till 2008. And the result was that you got a bubble economy in which a lot of people got into heavy debt in order to maintain their standard of living artificially, putting enormous environmental pressure on the world's ecosystems in the process as well. So finance has been the most artificial thing that has happened in the last generation or so. And because of the new technologies available, the IT and telecom technologies available, you can transfer vast sums of money at the click of a mouse. Money is not what people think anymore. Money is not currency notes or coins anymore. That's just like 4 or 5% of the total amount of money floating around in the world. Most of it is actually bank accounts or more commonly now just abstract things, clicks of the mouse which represent X, okay, and that X could be billions of dollars, you know, and with that click of the mouse you could actually just create money by an abstract mechanism. So once you move into that dimension, then you realize that money has always actually been an abstract force in human societies with very concrete consequences now, you know. The rate at which credit has exploded since the 1970s is exponential. The rate at which species have been going extinct is also very, very high and rising. So there seems to be some kind of a connection between those things. It's not coming into India, it is here for a while. It has been here for a long time actually now. And there's a sort of despair with which we want to have it. And we want to have the same problems that the West is having. And we want to face them in our own way or not face them in our own way. So, you know, the point is that the metropolitan areas of India are now fully globalized, fully integrated into the global economy. The rest of India, who cares about them? Who cares about 900 million people? Let them rot and die in the hinterlands. Let them live and die with the ecosystems we are destroying. We don't really care about them. We don't care about them unless they actually stand to give us a market. But you can run capitalism for 350 million people. I mean, what else is the United States of America? So if you can have an America within India, then you don't have to worry about the Africa within India, you know. So if the America within India is growing and, you know, is being able to accept illusions of trickle down, that is to say one day the prosperity will go down to the poor as well, then what's the problem? The rest will take care of itself. That's the belief which is so deadly in terms of the illusion that it carries, both ecologically and socially, politically. And we have to prepare for the catastrophes that will happen as a result of those illusions. You can't make people connect the dots when their jobs depend on not connecting them. It's as simple as that. People will connect the dots up to the point that it's safe for them. The intelligent ones, they find themselves caught. They find themselves caught in a world which is beyond their individual power to change. They are better off individually for any foreseeable future if they accept the terms of that world and they make the most of it as far as possible. And yes, there are problems, but the problems are being faced elsewhere. I'm not part of it. I'm not. Those who begin to see themselves as part of the problem live with an uneasy conscience, and after a while they make a choice. Make a choice one way or the other, most of the time this way, that is to say the way they have been living. Once you're caught in that system, it becomes very difficult to get out and very difficult to see the whole picture. You will necessarily see it from your point of view. You will see things which are consistent with your interests and not see things which are inconsistent with them. And that's how it goes. And that's why societies collapse, and that's why wars happen, and that's why human beings can't seem to change things fundamentally, because as a man is, so he sees, as the saying goes, you know. Well, many things. There's a whole set of do's and a whole set of don'ts. The don'ts are easier for me to speak about because they're known what not to do. For instance, if you're dying of cancer, stop smoking, etc. You know, if you're dying of urban cancer, you know, stop driving, reduce the load on the city's lungs, and so on. There's a whole set of don'ts like that. The do's are a bit harder for me to speak about because it would sound like prescription. Who am I to speak about them? Let people be creative, let people be imaginative, let people be innovative according to the gifts and faculties they have been blessed with, and create alternatives. Now, there are lots and lots of ideas. Try some of them out, whether it's growing your own herbs and vegetables, buying less from the supermarket, you know, buying food from, you know, organic stores which, you know, rely on supplies from your you know, region within the, you know, 500 square kilometer or 1000 square kilometer region you come from, instead of getting seedless grapes from Chile or something. So there are ways in which you can reduce your individual footprint. There's a whole set of things like that which have been thought about, which can be talked about and, you know, suggested. There are things you can do only socially or institutionally or organizationally, and those are problems which can't be solved individually. If it's a matter of reorganizing your neighborhood for garbage, then you have to work with your whole neighborhood. If it's a matter of deciding whether to allow coal mining in some part of India, then you have to work with the national and the state government. And those are larger levels of decision making at which, you know, the impacts are severe, for better or for worse, you know. And you can save a lot of damage to the country if you're convinced that you are individually helpless. Then work with other individuals who are actually trying to stop a devastating thermal power plant, which is going to kill off a whole bunch of forest species and you know, birds and fish and so on, you know. Now, we have to move well beyond the pretty trees and tigers. We have to understand that long before a tiger dies, there's a whole set of ecological events that have happened which are already harmful to us. You know, the tiger does not go extinct in some vacuum out of some coincidence. The tiger goes extinct because of a whole set of forces released in the ecosystem, okay, for which significantly humanity is responsible. So those causal links need to be understood. You need much better environmental education. You need children much smarter than their parents, who would actually remind parents to use less air conditioning, less driving, less taking holidays abroad, etc. Unless we develop and support a culture of frugality, you know, as against a culture of consumer excess, and imagine new economies coming out of that frugal worldview, we are not going to survive. You know, so you need a whole different Weltanschauung, a whole different worldview, and a whole different perspective on what is a viable, sustainable economy. You need an economy which is embedded in human culture and society, which itself is embedded in the natural world, and not an economy which thinks that the environment is embedded in it, and a society which has been reduced to the social sector, which the government will fund for this or that welfare program. That's the most arrogant piece of stupidity we are a part of today. Yeah, well, I mean, you can't treat cancer with blowtorches, you know, and the people who believe that are trying to do that. You know, you need to look for the causes of the cancer and try to control the causes, or stem the causes, or remove the causes if possible. It's within our collective power to do that. Whether we want to do it is the question. There's no shortage of intellect, there's no shortage of talent. There is all the deficit you want when it comes to the heart and the capacity, the willingness to see things for what they are. Human capacity for self-deception is infinite. Okay, we have no limits there, you know. So, and intelligent, clever people, they will deceive themselves best. They have much better reasons for going on the way they do, I should say, the way we do. Okay, so we can justify whatever we do in 100 clever ways, which would wash with the environment around us, which is utterly mediocre. Intellectually, we live in a completely mediocre world now. We accept all sorts of slipshod reasons for why certain things happen and why people do certain things when we know better. So there's a willful dumbing down, People don't mind being lied to if they're being lied to for their own material benefit. We notice the lies, we detect them, but we don't mind them because they serve our greed, our interests. Okay, so it's about becoming honest with yourself. It's about actually caring about your children and grandchildren instead of claiming to. Okay, if you really love your children, you will have to be honest with yourself, and you'll have to say to yourself, are we creating a world which they would feel welcome in, or a world which they would revolt against in a bad way, and revolt against their parents when they've grown up as well. All these questions are interlinked, they're not separate. And the kind of education our children are getting today, which is learning about animals in the supermarket, learning about plants in a food grocery, if that's how you're going to educate your children, then you will get ecological crisis. I mean, that's the inevitable consequence of that. There's nothing to shape their cognition in the correct way. See, the root cause, if you ask me, is a complete loss of vision. And the vision that I'm talking about is a vision of the whole. People have lost sense of the idea that life is a whole, that each of us is a whole, that each of our neighborhoods, each of our families, each of our cultures, each of our countries is a whole. It's not a fragment, it's not a part. The great successes of science and technology has taught everybody to break things down into smaller and smaller parts, to analyze the hell out of them, and to completely fail to recognize the parts as coming from the same elephant. Nobody can see the elephant anymore because we have totally subdivided everything into a world where we've concretized each of those subdivided analytical categories, and nobody knows how to put Humpty Dumpty together again. That's the basic problem. And it's not hard to get people to realize a sense of the whole. Children already have it. Unless adults corrupt their minds in schools and homes, and televisions ruin everything, children already have a sense of the whole. They are affected. If another child in front of them is beaten up, they respond. If the pet is treated badly, if an animal is treated badly, they understand. They understand, meaning they empathize. They will raise hell. You can't just slaughter people or animals in front of children. Okay, try teaching children by taking them to the slaughterhouses and showing how their beef is being made, how their cattle are being treated, and they'll respond very differently. So that's at the root of the difficulty, that we don't have a sense of the whole anymore, and we don't allow children or anybody to actually learn that sense, or to develop that sense, to develop that inborn sense. Meanwhile, we bring them up on a diet of economic growth. And we believe that economic growth is the overwhelming value. It's going to take us towards paradise, more and more and more and more. As Sachin Tendulkar says, ye dil mange more. Okay. Now, if the icon of the country is saying that, then of course the sky is the limit. If Mahendra Singh Dhoni is going to come every night and toss some whiskey into a bottle and say the sky is the limit, when actually the limit is the earth, okay, how many kids are actually going to believe the earth is the limit and not the sky? So you reach for the impossible, you raise your dreams further, you want to make your dreams come true. So join the gravy train by becoming more imbecilic, more immature, right? This is the dominant ideology. It's a thoughtless, greedy, mealy-mouthed ideology. I'm sorry, I don't have kind words for it. Okay, is this what human beings are for? Of course not. Is this what we are condemned to be? Of course not. But is this the likely default setting? Yes. So long as the advertising industry is so well funded, so long as our corporate policy, business, political, bureaucratic elites think like this, think like a herd, then yes, these are the only options. So the growth story, like I was saying earlier, hides a greed story. Do the poor ask for economic growth? Have you ever seen a poor person asking for economic growth? I have not. They haven't heard the word, most likely. They're looking for very basic things. They're not asking for much. The poor of this country are just asking for, a little bit of water to drink, a patch of earth which they can call their own and grow their food on, somebody who can help them heal if they get unwell. Those are the basic things they're asking for. They're not asking for growth. They're not asking for televisions, mobiles, computers, fast cars, planes and rockets. That's not their idea of happiness. But we can't provide them those little basic things. We just tell them, if you can't get bread, get cake. If you can't get water, buy Pepsi, and so on. This is the kind of ridiculous nonsense that you would expect from imbeciles, which is what we've become, which is what has happened. The growth story has to end. The question is, how will it end? Will we bring it to a civilized end? Or will the elements, like I said, account for us? That's all. In terms of the denouement of this whole drama, I see those are the only two options. Either we learn, and more importantly, unlearn before we learn, and understand that growth is the philosophy of a cancer cell, that those of us who are already well-fed and propertied and privileged and powerful, we don't need much more, okay? Our responsibilities should be clear, but we think of ourselves as leaders. Well, if we think of ourselves as leaders, let's at least live frugally so that those below us would also be invited to live frugally, because man is an ape at some level. We like to ape those above us. Just like, Indians like to live like Americans, most Indians like to live like metropolitan Indians. Okay. So if metropolitan Indians develop a culture of frugality in some future heyday of maturity, then that will actually teach the rest of the people to be modest and frugal and make us wiser and more sensible in dealing with our problems. But we don't go that way. We say we are not Gandhi. Gandhi was a human being. He was not a saint. He was a human being full of problems. And I personally have all kinds of disagreements with Gandhi, but I still believe he has a lot to say to the world to come, much more than any of our pundits today. So we need to bring back that whole culture of frugality. We need to bring back a whole world of thoughts, a whole world of imagination, and realign ourselves with the natural world, resume our relationship to nature. And all that, to me, means to at least suspend the growth story for a while and take cognizance of what has happened. Huge damage has been done. Huge amounts of water have gone under the bridge. So far Kashmir, Uttarakhand, Orissa get flooded. The day that Delhi gets attacked by floodwaters, nobody will be able to stop it. Okay, just take it from me. The forces at work are so powerful that if Terry breaks or some other big dam in the north breaks, the Himalayas, all the myths are full of the ecological fury of the Himalayas. But unfortunately, our Hindutva leadership has no connection to the ancient myths anymore. It just wants power, and it wants power on the terms of modernity, and will destroy India before it gives up its illusions. No, I think the world needs to be large. In Sanskrit we say Shashwat or Virat, it's huge, it's vast. Reality is like that. We need a cosmology. Humanity is never going to be happy till it has everything. But by everything, I don't mean physically, materially have everything. One of the great poets of Maharashtra, Bhakti poets, Tukaram, he wrote a beautiful poem which translates to, "The sky is my canopy and the earth is my throne." No king could write like that, right? The king wants just a small canopy and a small throne. He needs to lord over his little kingdom, his little fiefdom, just like Naren Bhai and others, right? That's pathetic. That's petty ambition, The grandeur of a spiritual vision, which is what this country has been known for and which is what we deserve, means that the whole sky is ours. The whole earth is ours. You take responsibility for the whole thing, not for Hindus here and Muslims there and Christians there. That's pathetic. That's nonsense. It's mediocre and it's petty. And you'll just kill each other and, be very far from God while doing it. The Upanishads say it's not the eternal in man that kills, it's not the eternal in man that dies. That's the Upanishads. So if you want to follow Vivekananda, please listen to what the Upanishads say. So nothing less than the whole, nothing less than all will ever satisfy humanity. The reason for humanity's miseries is because we are constantly being fed crumbs from the table. We are constantly being given crumbs as though it's the whole loaf. The whole loaf is not within the power of any man to give to another man. It's for us to realize ourselves. That's why we are here. That's the meaning of life, according to me. Okay, that's what this country at least has to give the world. Even in the future, it has to do that. Okay, that's not something that is happening right now. Right now, we are too busy catching up with the West, trying to beat China, and trying to play games which are lost before they are begun. They are hopeless games. That's not India's brief. India's brief is not to become a great global superpower the way Wall Street has fed our vanities to make us believe. India's brief is to become an ecological pioneer. So we need to actually do things in a small, modest, humble way. And in that sense, you're right. It's a small world you have to think from, start from. But it gets larger and larger. And not, like I said, in a physical, material sense, but in the sense of experience, imagination, metaphysics, and so on. All the dimensions along which we become very small, petty, and quarrelsome, which is why there are hundreds of crores of legal cases in the law courts, because we are constantly fighting each other. So if that's the result of colonial rule, we are beginning to realize only now how much damage colonialism did to our consciousness and our culture, that it made us forget the basics of our own culture. So that's the sort of place we are at. I think that we need to think at every level, at the small, local level, at the regional level, at the national level, at the continental level, at the international level, and at every level think both of the whole earth and think of the whole of humanity, not just for Hindus, not just for Muslims, not just for upper classes or elites, for everybody. But then people will say everybody can't live like that. Well, if everybody can't live like that, then why are you living like that? Why don't you set an example of the way life should be lived so that others can learn something from you? The example you are setting them right now is, let's get the latest Audi, let's get to the most beautiful woman, let's go to the most beautiful island in the South Pacific, and so on. That's the example you're setting people. What do you expect people to learn? So you have to set the right example, which is why I'm talking about Gandhi, because at least the man, whatever else your disagreements with him might be, at least he set the tone for a culture of frugality. Now, culture of frugality does not mean meanness, pettiness, smallness of heart. On the contrary, it means the exact opposite. It means largeness of heart. It means a society where individuals and communities will trust each other instead of writing laws which try to solve the problems which distrust brings. So it means a whole different culture, a whole different meaning of life, a whole different way of educating people, a whole different way of treating each other, and so on. Okay, I speak of a return to nature, by which I mean a resumption of our relationship to nature. Normally, when you speak in terms of a return to nature, people say, no, you can't go back. You can't go back because, let's say you start at point A in history, let's say 1750, then by 2000, the year 2000, you are at point B. So history goes like this, and you can't go back. And my point is that if you keep going, you might find that actually history goes a bit like this. So you come in a circular pattern and you come very close to the point where you were, but it's a different point. Let's call this point C. And so you move in a sort of spiral-like motion. That's a bit of what I think of the way history moves. Now, the way that technology works is, technology tries to take you out of this circular pattern and tries to run away with itself every time. From point B, it'll like to move to point D, but nature and the cycles of nature, water cycle, soil cycle, and so on, the elements sort of bring us back towards a circular pattern. So the more it tries to head towards D, the actual result is you end up at E, you know. So we need to think of a technology or a way of doing technology which keeps to this cycle instead of trying to run away from it. So these runaway tendencies of modern technology are actually very centrifugal and lead to a spiral in the end which is ecologically dangerous, and the spiral goes downwards. We need to have the spiral come up. So there needs to be a sense of development, there needs to be a sense of change, but the best way of doing that is by obedience to nature. Instead of mining non-renewable fossil fuels, we need to have energy systems which are renewable according to the cycles of nature and which will keep us disciplined into this spiral-like pattern and not try to run away. If we conform our technologies to that sort of an ecological pattern, then the same spiral-like motion will actually become virtuous rather than vicious. It'll go up rather than go down. So that's basically my idea of what I mean by resuming our relationship to nature in terms of our energy choices.